I'm gonna get started then. Go for it. Right, that's me. I work for a company that is now known as Intuit Credit Karma. I work for the company that makes the Credit Karma application. I used to be involved in helping with AST. I was the president for a couple of years after Michael, but before Gwen, and there are a couple other people in between. The other thing I'm known for is running the workshop on performance and reliability, which is, you've heard a couple of allusions to workshops while we're here, just as a plug. That kind of event I found very useful for testing. If you like this and the conferring part, and getting to ask whatever question you want, imagine if there was only 20 people in the room and no time limit, so you could keep asking questions till you were all done. That's what those workshops are like. And so I've been working about 30 years, and I've had several different kinds of roles over that time. I found them really helpful to me as a tester to have those different kinds of backgrounds. And these days, my title is SRE, but I mostly work on tooling for CI/CD and automated testing. Sorry, started too soon. Apologize. You missed the worst part of the presentation anyway.
They're officially late.
So one of the things that makes those workshops I was describing work is what are called experience reports. So a lot of times at conference talks, somebody comes out here and tells you best practices, things you ought to do, because they read about them somewhere and they tried them, and of course everything went perfectly for them. They attempted to implement these things off the shelf with no customization, with no regard for the context that they were using. At the opposite end of that is an experience report, where I'm going to tell you a story. This is how we communicate information to each other. Check any religious text, and I can be honest about what went well and what didn't, and I'll give you enough detail so you can figure out whether it applies to you or not. I mean, I happen to work in a company that was medium-sized and fairly modern, but a little bit behind on technology, and that might not be a match if you work at a bank. The job I had before this one, I worked in a company that we made software for medical trials, and we had a very thorough validation and verification system. Where I work now, people ship stuff into prod, YOLO all day. So hopefully I give you enough detail, you understand how to use it, because every tool is useful in some circumstances and potentially dangerous in others. So anything that you hear here, take it in that spirit. So I would say we'll go to the start, but it was joined in progress, because everything is already where it is. It got that way for a reason. When you show up, you need to learn where we're at and what got us here. So at the time, I joined this startup that was doing pretty well. And then I was fortunate enough that shortly after I joined, they were acquired by the 10th largest software company in the world. Most of the people that worked at the startup had been there for several years. Most of them had never worked anywhere else. So there were a lot of things that were foreign to them. And there were practices that had never really been imposed by anybody to make it like some other place. The startup culture in Silicon Valley, this is not Silicon Valley, but San Francisco, there's a lot of this. And this is not the craziest company I've worked at, for sure. There still is a great deal of emphasis on how fast can we deliver a feature? How fast can we ship something? We'd rather make money and deal with the consequences than not ship it. So sometimes we're slowed down a bit. Sometimes our things take a quarter to work on. The very biggest re-architectures take 2. Most things are shipping in weeks. Our former CTO was a founder of the company. He's no longer there anymore. He would yell at anyone who ever said the words technical debt. We weren't to discuss such things, because any such discussion was unlikely to be useful and would only damage our approach to velocity and moving fast. So we didn't talk about that. And the way we had solved the kinds of problems that usually lead to more structure around quality was just everyone's head was in the noose. If you ship something with a bug, then you got yelled at. Don't want to get yelled at? Don't ship it. So the process that grew up around that was Every deployment had a JIRA ticket that a manager needed to push a button on. So manual deployments of things into prod, shipping things often. Okay, there's a testing organization that when I first joined, I came in as a staff tester in the sort of to there. There's about 40, we call them full stack QEs, so that we can pay them lots of money. We do pay our QEs very well. Part of that is being a blue chip tech company. Part of that's being a startup. Part of that is our leader has carefully crafted job descriptions that involve programming skills and system analysis skills, and for these reasons, and putting engineering in our name. Most of our testers are capable of doing all these things. All of our testers have written some kind of automated code. So I think the tech bar for our testers is not that much higher than other places, but the structure around it and the expectations and their ability to move as quickly as the rest of the company is helps. So some exploratory testing, some test strategy. We have a metrics program. We haven't gotten a lot of value out of it. They're embedded on agile teams, and they have we have dotted line centralized testing, but generally our testers' day-to-day work is they sit with their engineers. And at the time, there was a dedicated test infrastructure team, and I joined, and we do our test automation frameworks, our Jenkins instances. We had an automation code reviews that group was running. We have a test rail, test case system, things like that. That was the responsibility of the test infrastructure team. More narrative in a moment. The only things I forgot here was we do have offshore testing in India. So a lot of the super boring regression work gets dumped on them. Have some toil. We'll put it in JIRA tickets for you to deal with overnight. Some people have experimented with feature work, but have decided the overhead of trying to communicate complicated things at speed is too hard. So some teams, it's the same thing they send that same day every week. But we've reached a point where we rely on that kind of safety for releases. So we release a native app. It's the majority of our customers. You've not dealt with a native app. There's this pipeline into the Google Play Store and the Apple Store where that app is going through it for 2 or 3 days, and you don't want to restart it, but you hope you've gotten it right. And at the level that we're at with revenue from consumers, that's a serious thing if we break that pipeline or we don't get the software into it fast enough. And then I said shipping. We do have this, we do A/B testing and ramping for basically every feature. We put it into production and it's ramped to 1% counts as shipping. Many of our features get yanked back out and never actually stay in the software. So when we joined in progress, we already had hundreds of tests in the test automation frameworks that had been built by the test infrastructure team. So there's Selenium, Apple tools, some GraphQL tests, and not so many Appium tests, all implemented in a single Ruby repo that people would write tests for. And the excuse the developers had for not writing any of the end-to-end tests is that they didn't want to use Ruby. But these tests existed. They were running in scheduled jobs across all our various environments, staging, production, things like that. And we had this state of fragmented test fixtures. If you're not familiar with the test fixture pattern, you separate the setup of a test, the users, the data, the things like that from the test that you actually run. So we had that for some version, but it was add this at the Jenkins job, add this in code, things like that. There's a platform engineering organization that was separate from testing. So these are the Google Cloud geeks lumped in with the people who run GitHub, with the people who run Artifactory, that kind of group. So like testing, these people are often classified as overhead. So there's not many of them. It's run pretty lean. A lot of these are people who have built the systems at the company and have never left. So they were pretty familiar with the tooling for building stuff. They did not know a lot about quality. I don't know if you've experienced this, but even people who don't know a lot about quality think that testing is pretty simple, and they could certainly handle it if they weren't otherwise occupied in more profitable pursuits. But our platform engineers are not allowed to just tell people that you're using things this way. If we want you to use a new thing, we have to come up with this value proposition for you and convince you to come on board. That's something that's changing. Certainly since this reading was taken about, I'd say, 2.5 years ago. These things should be more opinionated now. And we're starting to use terms like golden paths to try to describe, do this thing and then you get upgrades, don't do this thing and someone might scold you for it. So our tech stack was one of these. There had been a monolithic repo and then it had been separated into microservices, and at some point that will be complete. I'll check back with you in a couple of years on that. We do have a templated service framework that a lot of our people are ex-Twitter. So there's a project called Finagle, the way you can basically template a lot of the deployment things around your service. So we had around 200 around that time. Most of the stuff that we focused on shipping would be things that would follow this pattern. So we have a couple hundred of these. That's about 3/4. They handle about 3/4 of what we actually deploy. There's other stuff that is not in the service framework, but for most things that the platform engineering org is starting with, they target that pattern and say, well, if you're just using this pattern, you would already have this. About 50 to 80 engineering teams, maybe 1/3 of those have testers on them. The rest do not. They might work on some sort of data pipeline. They might work on some front-end framework kind of stuff where they don't have a dedicated tester. The testers tend to be accumulate around the UIs to our members. That's where the shipping decisions are believed to be made. The actual work is distributed throughout this architecture. We have about 10 million daily users. So that's a pretty substantial amount of the stuff that we're shipping. There are recommendation systems for showing people things. It's a fairly big system. I worked on bigger systems for things like invoice processing and stuff like that in terms of how many CPUs were being used, but this is pretty big. Yeah, I mentioned the hundreds of repos, most of them in the service framework. The building press part, already very well automated. You would click a button somewhere. So we call this ClickOps. I don't know if you've heard of that term. It's used derisively by people who are farther on in their, now we would say a GitOps journey, not just a DevOps journey. But we had a very good ClickOps process at that point. And then we can check things that are going out. Do they have their test? Do they have a valid schema? We have a whole policy engine to make sure that 2 people signed off on this PR and your unit test coverage hasn't declined. So that's all great, but no end-to-end testing support. Now, our history is that we've never really built an integration testing layer. So people build some confidence in the unit tests that they have and the other pieces of gear that they own that they can check the integration with easily. Everything else gets deployed to a shared environment. It has to be tested. Our integration test, people call it integration testing. What they're actually doing is end-to-end testing. So the integration testing layer of testing a specific endpoint does not really exist. So this was not deemed sufficient for us to do CI/CD, that we would need to bring these things together and have real end-to-end testing that we'd seen run against a copy of this whole platform so that we would have some confidence in shipping. Our deployments are pretty good. If you're not a geek about this stuff, I can go faster. This is our ClickOps system. It's called Falcon. People are very proud of it. It's part of our culture that people would rather build than buy. Some of them are not great software engineers, but they would still rather build. That's more fun. That's what you get promoted for. And we have a metric system. It has been painstakingly handcrafted. It takes snapshots of specific pieces of data that the people on that system think people would want to look at. It is not a system you can explore data with. It's not a system you can trend data with. But we have snapshots from moment to moment. We have some idea of where we think people should be in terms of change failure rate and the stuff that's in the books about how you do CI/CD. If you've not read Accelerate, that's almost 10 years old now. Most execs have it, and we'll nod when you quote from it. So if you're ever talking CI/CD, that's a good place to start. These metrics exist. Sometimes you would get, the 30-second version of this story is I helped create a quality metric that our CTO immediately started yelling at teams about, and I was made to regret that. And then people would leave those meetings and come yell at me and the people that I worked on the quality score with. But anyways. So this is 2.5, 3 years ago. A new VP of engineering arrives. If you worked in a bigger company, you know that quality sort of gets attached to whatever engineering VP is not, it doesn't put their finger on their nose fast enough or whatever. That guy came in, he was the new guy. When they were assembling his portfolio, he got quality. He had led quality before, but he didn't really understand quality very well. He came up and his big mandate to change everything was to tell us maybe we should shift left. He said, okay, we should shift left. Well, tell me more what you mean by that. And to this day, we're still not sure exactly what that means. But it was you're not allowed to reduce quality, you just have to go faster. And maybe improve quality too while you're also going faster, but you definitely need to go faster. And as like many people who've come to our company who've ever worked anywhere else, there seemed to be like, what happened? Why is there no observability here? Why? And in his case, it was, why is there no CI/CD? And because I had other experiences, I was like, you're right, there's no CI/CD. We decided this is probably the place we could apply the most leverage and speed things up. The execs gave us this wish list of the ways they wanted to control this system, to be able to shut it off when some bad site incident had happened. They didn't want a fully automated system that would keep throwing code into prod. They didn't want it to deploy on weekends or holidays. So this was part of the requirements that were arriving as we're designing it. Because remember, we build it, we don't buy it or download it. So we would that fed into a custom CI/CD system. And then this executive decided that our team that was doing all the infrastructure for QE should be over in the platform engineering org and out of his org. And then we got kicked over to that other group, and I got a new boss. And we started working over there with the mandate, make the CI/CD thing happen, and now you're in the same org, so you should stop arguing and get this done. And that's where we start. All right, so I got a few minutes if you want me to go back to any of the table setting here, because then I'll get to the narrative about what happened after that next. Fine to keep going if nobody wants to check in here. Okay. So I'm figuring out what we're going to do, and I say, there are things I wish we had. There's a lot of testing conference talks are, not this one, like the one you go have at the table at lunch, are we do A, I wish we did B, but nobody listens to me, so we're at C. In this case, people are listening to me, but I had to make it work. So what do we already have? We have some existing tests. We've never shipped code this way. We have no culture of maintaining a pipeline, of understanding the build breaks, you better stop and fix it. By the time we were actually doing this, there still need to be ClickOps so that people don't have to rely on a pipeline to get stuff done. There's a lot of risk aversion to shipping to prod. People felt that their careers had been impacted by bugs reaching prod. That may be the case, and perhaps it should have been, but it made people very nervous. So definitely don't. You can't connect to prod yet. Just start out with test environment, ship to test environment. We'll see how that goes. And then some similar systems that I kind of skipped over earlier about how we would ramp code and how we would build code had incidents, and those had been deemed very painful. And I was in the same group that had owned those incidents. So the people that I was now reporting to, my new bosses, who I didn't know super well, were very gun shy about causing some sort of problem. Like, yeah, what you're doing, we're excited to build this. We want to do it, but we just can't have any problems. So, like software engineering, right? It said that not everyone there was really great at software engineering. So what we built was something called the orchestrator. So there's a state machine that we would use to define, what the pipeline should be doing. And so we started out with that, your service, your backend service that's in our talent framework, it will fit into this pattern. And we had we defined the state sequence for that. We have a couple more we've added since there for things like front end repos and stuff like that. But at the time, we would define the state machine, and then you'd have yet another YAML file in your repo, and there would be a name for each stage, and you say what step, what test you want to run. And you would point to some Jenkins job somewhere, and then then deploy here or don't deploy there. So the UI that the developers would learn how to do CI/CD with would look like this, and then if something fails, these are all links to logs where you can jump in there. We thought this was pretty cool because there's some problem you can troubleshoot. You don't have to do the spelunking through the series of logs that from oral history are the right order in which to troubleshoot a thing. And then copy that URL and then paste that into a system. Oh wait, I didn't log onto that system yet. That kind of thing.
Did development manage their builds in Jenkins as well?
There's no separation. This is another part of the culture that I knew enough about, that people took my word for it, thankfully, that you cannot have the silo between devs and QEs was one of the biggest challenges we had. Devs not being interested in end-to-end tests. And QEs trying to catch up, and they're finding bugs in production with their tests and then explaining to the developers who, oh, that's interesting. Can you reproduce that for me? So this is meant to be part of everyone's build process. Yeah, that's good enough. One idea that I had is this thing called bake time, because we have all these repos that have no tests. So how do we make sure you don't break production? How about we keep you in the test environment for some amount of time? So if there's a problem with one of your dependencies, you'll detect it there before it becomes a problem in production. So I was asked to spell out and model and spreadsheets, like how long is something a tier 1 service with no test coverage that has had one SI in the last month. The SI is a site incident, some problem. How long was your bake time going to be? And then this is also the mechanism where I mentioned we need to be able to turn it off. We need to be able to not let you deploy. So we need some system of gating, yes, no. We break everyone's pipelines all at once, or we unblock them. This is the first time that anyone got mad about this build stuff. So somebody working on the feature accidentally implemented it, and suddenly everyone was experiencing it all at once, as opposed to what we were hoping to do, which is test it out and then eventually add cohorts to it. So after that happened, people got very mad, and meetings above my head were had at which it was determined this would be opt-in only. So we've kind of given up because we don't think anybody is going to opt in to this big time. I mean, it's on a backlog somewhere. Okay. Part of this overall program was, well, we're going to put in this new JavaScript testing framework, so the developers will be happy to use it, and we'll modernize because Selenium is so old school and Cypress is so much easier to write tests in. Okay, maybe. Part of the pattern for how we would do our test jobs would be making it so you could change tests in and out at the job level to help developers deal with, I want to ship and my test doesn't work, so I'm just going to disable this job. So we've kind of split the difference, but over time our test coverage and our CI/CD jobs has gone down. And the other part of the plan, so remember I've been in QE, I have 40 friends that I wanted to make sure that they would have something to do when we were shifting left, was we would want to teach them more about how to work in that kind of environment. So some of this is architectural coverage, meaning, hey, the service is shipping, do you understand the impact of that? Do you have tests that you feel validate that one of these backend services changing still works? We put more emphasis on API testing, and we had to harden some more tests. A lot of people learn how to write code in our test automation repo. We had tests with no asserts. We had a lot of very sloppy, so if the test fails, go figure out what happened without any check of what actually happened. Because we had a lot of amateurs. And we would try higher code review standards, and then we'd start leaving people behind, and we'd have to tune to that. And that improved over time. It got better. Did some training with our QEs on all of these subjects. Oh, I pushed the wrong button. We're back. Okay. All right. So now that my plan is coming together, we're going to start alpha releasing this new pipeline system. Guess who the DevOps engineers are going to be? Our testers who are shifting left, just like you asked. So we started out with, I handpicked a couple testers and teams where their tests were in some state of reasonable repair. The testers I felt were capable of learning quickly enough, because I was feeling like I was also auditioning the concept of our testers becoming pipeline engineers. So at the same time that the tech is moving, and we're trying to demonstrate that the proof of concept of the tech, I'm trying to also show our execs that our QEs are capable of doing this work. So we'll give them what limited documentation we can come up with. Our platform engineering team is not great about documentation. They're very thankful for AI, because AI will just repeat stuff from documents for them in Slack, so they don't have to help. We taught a bunch of QEs how to use Cypress, and we recommended that they replace a lot of their Ruby tests in the pipelines. And then we'll see how this goes. So in the first iteration, we worked with just our team that handles auth. They cause the most problems in our lower environment, so it was a little bit of like kicking them in the butt. But we also had the right combination of tests and expertise there. Some of this has got nothing to do with qualifiers. It has to do with leaders' willingness to try something. And the UM team was tired of us beating them up about breaking our test environment. So we did that, and about one cohort per quarter we would add to prove the stuff out. And the software for the pipelines wasn't really complete at this stage either. So the first single flaky auth repo, that went pretty well. The next round, I added some specific teams. I had some particular people in mind. That went pretty well. We had success on each of those. People were shipping. Success meaning this code had been moved through this pipeline. Not so much success with getting developers to pay attention to end-to-end tests. I'll talk some more about that a little bit farther in this presentation. But in terms of, could we stand up in front of our OKR meetings and say, yes, we succeeded, 0.7, 1.0. It was getting this stuff actually shipping through pipelines. This is the early adopters. That went okay. We picked a couple more teams. We could claim this is a real thing. Like we've validated that this is working. We have 10% of our repos on it. We're ready to ship this to the rest of our teams. So we did that like last July. And then AI mania happened, and this has just kind of continued by itself. That's okay. I was reading this article the other day where a guy said the job of a staff engineer is to start a big rock rolling downhill so that they can walk away and the rock can keep going without them. So most of our backend services are all on there now. We've deleted some of the old code. That's all going pretty well. We kind of stalled out on front-end repos. The single person who works on front-end deployment code has been pulled in too many directions and hasn't really delivered our pipeline pattern for that yet. And now we're thinking about GitOps and what does this look like? Because we want to get rid of Jenkins. We want to look at, I was telling people when we were doing this, we were going to jump to 2014 first, and then we would get to the 2020s once we could understand a pipeline code. Okay, so what I took from this, I'm going to present this. These are not. I only have a 30-minute presentation?
No, you have 10 minutes if you want to keep the Q&A.
Okay, but the session goes till
Yeah.
what time?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't see what time this ends. 10 o'clock?
Session ends at 10.
Okay.
You want to have open season.
Okay.
So if you want to be on typical, you have 10. But if you want to, your call. I'm just letting you know.
Okay, fine. All right, so this is what I took from it. These are not best practices. I'm not urging you to go apply this to every problem that you have. So the sale for using QEs as pipeline engineers was made on them being SDETs, but that's not what made us succeed or fail. It's to me, the skills of being able to understand the technology that they were working with, and so that architectural testing patterns I was sort of alluding to, being able to negotiate with engineering leaders, being able to communicate the work that they were doing. That seemed to me to be more of a differentiator of whether you could do this or not. We had a lot of really good iteration with documentation and testers trying stuff out, and oh wait, does it work this way? Why does it work that way? Why can't I do this? And that was actually super helpful. And then getting the team signed up, especially before we released, was usually a matter of me going in with testers who wanted to do this and we thought was a good fit. We go meet with their engineering leadership and convince them to take a step with us. So overall, the testers being involved worked pretty well for proving this out. And I think that in most cases, they've shown up and done what we'd hoped they would do. One team, their manager decided it would be an important growth opportunity if their tester on their team was part of our beta. So I don't think it was a good idea, friend, because he was a good friend of mine. He said, but you're my friend, so you should do this. So we let that team on, and then I built out the team's pipelines for them because the person who couldn't do it still couldn't do it. We thought we were going to be using Cypress. We ended up shipping all of these pipelines with Ruby code. A lot of them are still using Ruby code because the dev siloing problem remains somewhat unsolved. In fact, it was just last month I had to develop. So my responsibilities, I'm on this platform engineering org. This is no longer my day-to-day responsibility. I do other things, one of which is an on-call rotation. Developers showing up, pissed off that their pipeline wasn't working. Like, okay, well, did you read the logs? Well, no, I didn't ask for these tests, and I don't know what they do. So that's a sign of how well that's going, that we have not managed to share pipelines and keeping them healthy and the things that have made a CI/CD process work in my experience. There's things we still would have liked to do. I mean, I'm kind of a product owner for this. Every product owner has a backlog, most of which will never get built. A little bit more we would like to have done. And we have a quarterly delivery motion with our OKRs, which unfortunately means a lot of work has to fit into that bucket. And a lot of work is allowed to expand to the size of that bucket. So it's not really what we want. It is yeah, so we definitely could have shipped more if we'd done it more efficiently. As somebody new in a platform engineering organization who thought they knew about testing but didn't, it was very apparent how little they knew about testing. That did not seem to harm their confidence that they could build tooling for testing without consulting with people who do testing. There's also, I don't want to do open up the "it sucks to be a tester" hymnal and sing hymn number 1 about how people don't think testing is important, but there's some of that. So there was not a lot of confidence that the testers could do the thing that we were asking them to do, which was configure YAML, which to me seems a little dismissive. And then the breaking the silos, that's probably the biggest failure. We have a couple developers who understand their pipelines very well and like it and enjoy it. And developers who, that's something testers take care of. I see Slack messages, pipeline's broken, some QE look at this, which I guess at least the QE is doing a little bit more. And it's very interesting how opinions about how CI/CD should be done were held by people who had never done it. And they would tell me, that's the wrong thing. And they're like, well, why do you say that? Well, because it's not a best practice. Okay, well, have you built systems like this? No, but I've read about them. Or my buddy told me about this, or whatever. Some people understood that every successful project is fitting the context. Many did not. And this is such a truism. I'm embarrassed to repeat it, but it's true yet again. We had no technical problems that were unsolvable or even difficult. These were all very easy to implement the things we wanted. Very people problems were the problems. What are you showing me?
If you want to keep open season.
I do want to keep open season. Thank you. People, they got things are the way they are because they got that way. You have to change the incentives if you want to change things. And this old sentence, not me either. Context and culture eat strategy for breakfast. I had a lot of great ideas. They did not survive in counting the inertia of the culture. And that is it for me.
All right. Okay, so this is what so for those who, again, open season, if you have your cards, hold them up. I will get your initials and then we'll go in the order which they are listed. So, let's see.
What's the bar for going out then? 100% test pass? I mean, you have the human then blocking manual component, so what's the bar?
So most teams where all of their tests pass, they will deploy to the integration environment headlessly, which is great. Like you merge it, you create a release PR, and then at the end of that pipeline, your code is in the integration environment. There is intentionally no bar. We're not allowed to impose that kind of standard. Whatever test they deem appropriate, or no tests at all. And that's I started out with I need to make sure everybody reaches this bar, and then I realized, kind of like the lesson with state of our test automation, was I need to meet people where they are. People hadn't done it before. Now, in some cases, and I didn't want there to be an excuse like, well, we can't possibly do this. These tests don't exist. Try again next quarter, which is definitely a thing that has happened as well. As far as shipping to prod, we haven't even enabled that. We cannot gain a consensus on what that standard that you're asking for should be. I've proposed a couple versions of that. They haven't gone anywhere. It doesn't seem there's a lot of energy for it.
Or whatever.
Yeah, there's still somebody somewhere pushes ClickOps as the thing into prod.
SH.
So I had a couple of questions. So first one, like you mentioned, you have a lot of teams and the code review process is going down, and then improve the code review process, right?
Improve the what process?
Code review process.
Oh, the quality process?
Code review.
Code review process.
Yep.
Oh, so when I was talking about that code review process, I was talking about our test automation repo. The code review processes of the engineering teams, when they're on their shippable code, those vary great. Some teams are very responsible. Most reviews are LGTM. So go ahead with your question, but I just want to reset that and say this is not all of our development teams. This was teaching our testers about automating testing and the tests they wrote.
So how did you handle that one? Like, how did you make sure that for each and every test scripts, how do you ensure that your party is good?
One of the good things about our team getting ejected is that I made that team stop reviewing testers' tests and had told the testers they need to review their own tests. So that moved the pain closer to the people who could do something about it. We had a really kind of gross situation where there are people who deemed themselves technical enough to decide whether this was good code and others not good enough. And for culture reasons, as much as anything else, I stopped that. So the test infra team no longer blocks PRs, and it's other testers who have built how their review processes and how they do things. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
All right. Jeff?
So when this change happened, the new VP came in and laid out their goals. Was there discussion around, I think silos was kind of a big thing. There's discussion around combining the devs and testers on the same teams and working together.
Well, so in theory, they were standing up today, every day together. They were working on features today, or sorry, I should say then, and still today. If you're a tester where I work, you're probably 75% identify with the engineering team you support. And then you go to some quality meetings once a week. But for the most part, you communicate a lot more with the engineers you support than with anybody in the quality, with a quality title.
Okay. So there was already that relationship built there.
Yes, yeah. And then the other very old pendulum swing is he started at the beginning talking about the separating quality to, decentralize it, and I've seen this so many times. Oh, let's decentralize quality. Quality's bad. Let's re-centralize it. And I was, oh yeah, that takes a couple years, right? So that actually, we had a lot of discussion about doing that, and after all this time, it seems like it's probably not going to happen, or it's delayed, or who knows. But we still are in that same spot of you have a quality title, but you sit next to your engineers, you're in stand-ups with them every day. You ship their features.
Did you see that the change in the title actually helping break down some of those items?
The quality engineering title
Them
predates.
doing the silo and them working in the pipeline directly.
So they were quality engineers when I arrived. They were still called QAs or testers.
Yeah.
So that the title did some work, particularly in HR and compensation leveling. It didn't seem to necessarily, we still had the same kind of silo though between the two teams. And then with the siloing after they started doing more DevOpsy things, we talked about giving people some DevOps titles. That didn't really happen. And I don't know, I think that there were the people who were already inclusive were still inclusive. The people who were already doing this, I'm not sure it would have changed anything for them. I would like to have tried, but it's a company big enough that it's hard to change job titles, and you have to get a bunch of people aligned to do a thing.
Any other questions? Any other questions?
I don't look my bad. Sorry.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
So what was your end goal with the integration testing? I mean, were you able to establish more integration testing throughout this implementation of pipelines and teams? I'm sure I understood that.
So we didn't really have like integration testing the way most people think about it, like contract testing or testing an API endpoint. So this environment where you deploy to and people run end-to-end tests. If you're on a team that has QBs, they would manually test it, or they might have automated tests that they would run. If you don't have those, if you're not budgeted for those for your function, and if you don't have a UI, you probably don't. You have basically nothing. So you deploy it and you wait a day, or you deploy it and you would figure out how to stimulate it yourself. And it would be this like quick manual check. So we've increased the coverage for those people because they can kick off scripts of tests that they didn't necessarily author. So it's improved incrementally, it's improved the coverage for them.
Eric, when you're back to the last subject of distributed versus centralized QA, who's checking in general your automation test code? Is it up to each team to keep themselves code reviewed and quality at a certain level? Or do you have a centralized body that or something process where they have to keep reviewing?
Something I should have been more explicit about that in the Ruby testing solutions, there's a centralized repo. And so there's a team of like almost like a guild of testers, a couple of which are here, who would review PRs and would approve them before they went in. The move to Cypress, part of that was moving the tests into the repo for what's being tested so that the team would own those standards. So if you're writing a Cypress test, in theory, your developers should be seeing it next to all their other PRs. And maybe even adding a test when they go in, but yeah, that was a little bit too much to ask.
Okay. Yes. Okay.
I think I know the answer to this, and it's going to be a two-word answer, which is a joke at this conference. But do you have a preference between, like, in the code repos, like Ruby, it was run centrally. Cypress, it's dispersed out to the teams. I don't know that there's not a better everywhere, but do you have a preference, like in your case, would you have preferred to have?
Well, in this circumstance, the ownership was localized, and there wasn't a lot of centralized standards to refer to, and that wasn't really a motion the company had. It made more sense to have that decentralized. So I'm not trying to be a context-driven wise ass.
I know.
Oh, I am.
That's where I was going. Like, I really feel like the answer is going to be, it depends, haha, and we all leave. But yeah.
No, well, I mean, it's what the pieces of the context made it seem to me that that I was doing the right thing by breaking that centralized approval. And okay, well, you're going to own everything anyway. You're only going to ship if you feel comfortable anyway. You may as well be setting the standard for your team. And some teams have gone up and some teams have not.
The same thing with test coverage. How does that managed? At a project level or?
So we were very interested in unit test coverage, and we'll block your PR for unit test coverage goes down. One of the big holes we have is we don't really have any kind of feature-based, this is what your coverage looks like approach that we've been able to use quite. And we have a test case database that nobody looks at. Who isn't a tester. So somehow we continue to fly blind with that, where people on a team might have an idea of what's covered before release, but they don't really know, or they've made that the QE's problem, or every time there's an incident, they look and, there better be a test for this. Okay, well, there was, but you shipped anyway. That's something we definitely need to improve that.
All right. Going once, and twice.